I know I keep going back to this question, but it really is the only question worth asking because everything else in Christian theology rests on it. Is there actually a God in factual reality that we can discover through something more than wishful thinking? Christians seem to think yes, but they're never able to show this is actually true. I know because I keep asking and I keep getting the runaround. It's like having a debate with a 6-year-old. They don't have the slightest idea what's being talked about. They only care what makes them feel good, not what's actually real. But they're right because they have blind faith. So here we go again with more "we believe for no good reason" nonsense. Enjoy!
Does God exist? Is there evidence for the existence of God?
Well, no. Not if you're talking about objective, demonstrable, verifiable evidence. There just isn't any for any God that anyone's come up with so far. No, I'm not talking about your biased interpretations of philosophical quandaries. I'm not talking about your wishful thinking. I'm talking about demonstrable evidence that points to a direct causal link to a particular deity that you claim to worship. That simply doesn't exist. If it did, you could just point to it and you wouldn't have to make this video.
The existence of God cannot be proved or disproved. The Bible says that we must accept by faith the fact that God exists.
Then you've got nothing. Faith is a meaningless concept. You can have faith in literally anything, from alien abductions to unicorns to leprechauns to honest politicians. Just having faith doesn't make it so. Faith is meaningless to anyone who cares about actual truth. I don't care what you have faith in. I care what you can prove. And while I can't prove that gods don't exist, I also can't prove leprechauns don't exist, and neither can you. Does that make believing in leprechauns reasonable? Does it make believing in unicorns rational? Or should reasonable and rational people only believe in things for which there is actual, objective, demonstrable, verifiable, and testable evidence? That one gets my vote. We don't take kids with imaginary friends all that seriously. Why would we? They're imaginary, and as the kids grow up, they realize that these imaginary friends don't exist. So why would we allow otherwise seemingly normal adults to continue to believe in imaginary gods into adulthood? Isn't there something wrong with these people?
And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Hebrews 11:6.
What's the point in coming to a non-existent entity? Why can't we just say that Bigfoot rewards those who earnestly seek him? Or that it's impossible to please the Loch Ness Monster without faith? Why should we care about the feeling of these things that we have no reason to think are real in the first place?
If God so desired, he could simply appear and prove to the whole world that he exists. But if he did that, there would be no need for faith. Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen me, yet have believed." John 20:29.
That's just a complete cop-out. If God could just magically appear, then faith would be completely useless. Faith is just a made-up concept. It's a justification for beliefs that can't be justified any other way. It's just another example of the idiotic philosophical hoops that theists have to leap through in an attempt to show that the stupid things they believe aren't nearly as stupid as they actually look. And then they point to the Bible, an ancient book of mythology written by ignorant idiots who had no clue about the world around them. They were just trying to rationalize away the things they didn't comprehend. But of course, today we do, at least in the broad strokes. We don't need gods to explain the things that we were ignorant of in the past. I'd argue that we never needed gods if we were intellectually honest. We should have just admitted that we didn't know and kept looking for answers, but the human brain isn't wired that way, and a lot of people, even today, are far more interested in emotional comfort than intellectual honesty, and I find that endlessly depressing.
That does not mean, however, that there is no evidence for God's existence. The Bible states, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words into the ends of the world." Psalm 19:1-4.
But that's not actual evidence, though. That's a bald assertion. It doesn't actually produce demonstrable, objective, and testable links that show that one thing is factually the result of another. It doesn't show that any demonstrable God actually caused the world as we see around us to come into existence. It's just a claim. We could say, just as accurately, that the world declares the brilliance of invisible magical unicorns who caused the entire universe to come into existence with the magic of their fantastical horns. That claim is no less credible than claims that gods did it. And by no less credible, I mean that neither of them has any credibility whatsoever. I bring this up because Christians will point to the Bible like it means something. Hindus could just point to the Vedas, or Muslims could just point to the Quran, and Christians wouldn't take those books seriously. So why do they think that people who aren't religiously predisposed to believe in their silly book, why would we believe any of that crap?
Looking at the stars, understanding the vastness of the universe, observing the wonders of nature, seeing the beauty of a sunset, all of these things point to a creator God.
No, not so much. Grandeur doesn't equate to gods. Being impressed by your surroundings doesn't mean you have to invent an imaginary creator to explain it, especially when actual reality doesn't require such a thing to be explained. That's the difference between having a rational grasp on the world around you and a flight of fantasy. You don't need gods to explain any of it. You just want gods because it makes you feel good.
If these were not enough, there is also evidence of God in our own hearts. Ecclesiastes 3:11 tells us, "He has also set eternity in the hearts of men." Deep within us is the recognition that there is something beyond this life and someone beyond this world. We can deny this knowledge intellectually, but God's presence in us and all around us is still obvious. Despite this, the Bible warns that some will still deny God's existence. The fool says in his heart there is no God. Psalm 14:1.
That's so stupid, I almost don't know where to go with it. No, the fool doesn't say there's no God. The rational, intelligent man will shout it from the mountaintops because there's no reason whatsoever to think that any gods of any kind actually exist in the real world. If you look at how everything here is framed, every last bit of it, it's all emotional. It's all an appeal to feelings. There's no science here. There's no objective evidence. There are no tests, no experiments. It's just meant to make you feel good about empty claims that have no intellectual validity. If you look at the way all of this is framed, you could replace every instance of the word God with unicorn and every mention of the word Bible with the big book of unicorn magic, and it wouldn't lose a thing in the translation.
Since the vast majority of people throughout history, in all cultures, in all civilizations, and on all continents believe in the existence of some kind of God, there must be something or someone causing this belief.
Wrong! Humans believe all kinds of really idiotic things and have throughout history. It's because we're programmed by evolution to seek out patterns. It's a survival tactic. It allows us to see the patterns of predators before they can leap out of the brush and get us. But it also lets us see things in the clouds that don't really exist. But because we've evolved to see patterns, we don't like admitting our ignorance. We construct answers to questions even if we don't have any real solutions. We actually get a shot of feel-good hormones in the brain when we do this. We get positive reinforcement because our bodies are rewarding us for acting in ways that used to aid in our chances of survival. Except it really doesn't help us survive anymore, and evolution hasn't yet had a reason to edit it out of our genome. So, just because lots of people have believed in lots of stupid things throughout history, that doesn't mean that any of those things are actually so. People have believed that the earth is flat, too, and they're simply wrong. People have believed in a hollow earth, in all kinds of monsters, in Atlantis, you name it. There are probably people, no matter what you think up, who have believed it just because it made them feel good to do so. Feeling good is not reality. Sorry.
In addition to the biblical argument for God's existence, there are logical arguments.
Whoa. I'm going to stop you right there. There are no biblical arguments. There are claims that come from the Bible, but none of them stand up to a moment's critical scrutiny. There are no legitimate arguments in the Bible, any more than there are in the Vedas, in the Quran, in Dianetics, in the Satanic Bible, or any other religious book out there. Let's stop pretending otherwise.
First, there is the teleological argument. The teleological argument states that since the universe displays such an amazing design, there must have been a divine designer.
Except it doesn't. What it has is the appearance of design. And this goes back to our evolved pattern-seeking tendencies. We look for patterns, even where they don't exist, and we find them, even if they're not real. You can have a 4-year-old scribble on a piece of paper, and you will find images in it. These images were never intended by the 4-year-old, but your brain locates patterns and assigns them significance even if they're not real. And the more convinced you are that there are patterns, the more patterns you will find, and the more significance you will place on these non-existent patterns. It's a remnant of our evolution. And when you start off with the belief that there's a God, you will find things that support your belief everywhere you look. This is called confirmation bias. You look for the things that confirm what you already believe, and you ignore the things that prove it wrong. It's a logical fallacy that a lot of people engage in subconsciously.
For example, if the Earth were slightly closer or further away from the Sun, it would not be capable of supporting much of the life it currently does. If the elements in our atmosphere were even a few percentage points different, nearly every living thing on Earth would die. The odds of a single protein molecule forming by chance is 1 in 10 to the 243rd power. That is a 1 followed by 243 zeros. A single cell is comprised of millions of protein molecules.
Yes, that is true, but it assumes that the life that is currently here is supposed to be here. In fact, life on this planet evolved to match the conditions of the planet. The planet doesn't exist to match the conditions required by our form of life. Had the conditions been different, then life, if it evolved at all, would have evolved differently. This is like the puddle of water who's amazed at how perfectly the hole it resides in was designed to contain it. If conditions were different, we would be too, and we'd probably still be going, wow, isn't it so amazing that we're puddles of goo that exist in a perfectly designed methane environment. People are just stupid, aren't they?
The second argument for God's existence is called the cosmological argument. Every effect must have a cause. The universe and everything in it is an effect. There must be something that caused everything to come into existence. Ultimately, there must be something uncaused in order to cause everything to come into existence. That uncaused cause is God.
It's amazing how the cosmological argument, which posits that every effect must have a cause, just throws that right out the window when it comes to God. Every effect has to have a cause, except for this thing over here that we're just going to invent out of whole cloth, which gets to be the exception because we say so. But why does that get to be the exception? Why can't the universe itself be the uncaused cause? Why is it automatically God? Well, because it makes them feel good, of course. It isn't about reality, it's about emotions. Of course, cause and effect is a result of causality, part of the physical laws that define our universe, or at least our corner of the multiverse, however you want to phrase it, that came into being with the Big Bang. Outside of our universe, who can say if causality is even a thing? Theists always try to say that God is outside our universe, outside of causality, to get around the requirement, but if that's the case, then anything potentially outside of causality could have caused our universe to come into existence, and that thing doesn't have to be a god. It doesn't have to be sentient. It doesn't even have to be alive. The whole argument is idiotic.
A third argument is known as the moral argument. Every culture throughout history has had some form of law.
That's because humans are an inherently social species, and we need rules on how to coexist successfully. We codify those social rules into laws that define how we live and interact. In fact, we find the same thing among other social animal species. They might not have laws, but they certainly have rules defining social interaction. They have hierarchies and rules of acceptable behavior. Animals that violate those rules can be ejected from the groups. So humans are not actually alone in the way that we act on this planet.
Everyone has a sense of right and wrong. Murder, lying, stealing, and immorality are almost universally rejected.
Well, not so much. If everyone had a sense of right and wrong, we wouldn't need codified rules because everyone would automatically follow the accepted social standards, and we'd have no need for prisons or other such penalties. The idea that everyone magically knows the difference between right and wrong is just nonsense. But the idea that biblical rules are almost universal is completely absurd. Take murder. There are plenty of cultures out there where murder was not only acceptable, but required. Take the Aztecs and Mayans, who believed that their gods required human sacrifice. They would take their enemies and line them up in front of their temples and rip their still beating hearts out of their chests. And their enemies were not, by and large, doing this against their wills. They followed the same beliefs and were often entirely willing, because they had been beaten, to go to their deaths because they believed it would make things better for their families. We can find similar things for just about all the biblical commandments. But what we can also do is look at the biblical laws and find things that absolutely are reprehensible to most people today. Slavery is absolutely commanded in the Bible. And we're not just talking about indentured servitude, where a male Hebrew slave could only be required to serve for 7 years. We're talking about lifelong slavery, where you could beat your slaves as long as you didn't kill them, and where you owned them for as long as they lived, and their children would also be slaves for as long as they lived, because that's all they could ever be. But let's not forget, if you were a female Hebrew slave, she didn't have to be set free like men were, and there were always ways for slave owners to trick their male Hebrew slaves into remaining slaves forever. Is this moral? I sure the hell don't think so, and pretty much nobody else does either.
Where did this sense of right and wrong come from, if not from a holy God? Despite all of this, the Bible tells us that people will reject the clear and undeniable knowledge of God and believe a lie instead. Romans 1:25 declares, they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen.
Where did it come from indeed? It's handy when you can just define anything that falls outside your undemonstrated and indefensible religious beliefs as a lie. A lie according to who? The people pushing the religion, of course. Just making these claims doesn't make the claims true. It's no more valid to point to Romans 1:25 than to pull out a book on anti-Semitism and say it must be true. So says Mein Kampf 1:25.
The Bible also proclaims that the people are without excuse for not believing in God. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Romans 1:20.
So let me get this straight. Everyone believes, even those people who don't believe, because according to this silly book, everyone believes. Sure, tell me another one. But those are some really good reasons to reject any claim made without evidence. This isn't limited to gods. I don't believe in unicorns for the same reason. I don't believe in leprechauns for the same reason. Or maybe I really secretly believe in those too. Who the hell knows?
People claim to reject God's existence because it is not scientific or because there is no proof. The true reason is that once they admit there is a God, they must also realize that they are responsible to God and in need of forgiveness from him. Romans 3:23 and 6:23.
No, the true reason is that there's no evidence that any of these imaginary gods actually exist in reality. But even if such a god actually existed, that doesn't necessitate that I bow down to it. That doesn't mean I have to worship it. And for the biblical God, there's pretty much no chance that I ever would, because the God of the Bible is a dick. He hasn't earned my fealty. He hasn't earned my respect. Hell, the God in the Bible hasn't even earned my tolerance. The God of the Bible is a reprehensible jackass who acts like a spoiled child, makes the same mistakes again and again and again, and tries to blame his creations for his own failure. What a fucking prick.
If God exists, then we are accountable to him for our actions. If God does not exist, then we can do whatever we want without having to worry about God judging us.
But that doesn't mean we can do whatever we want without anyone judging us. We are accountable to each other. And here's the thing. We actually exist. We are demonstrably real. God isn't.
That is why many of those who deny the existence of God cling strongly to the theory of naturalistic evolution. It gives them an alternative to believing in a creator God.
Oh, here we go. No, we accept evolution because of the overwhelming weight of objective, demonstrable, and testable evidence for it. You know, that stuff we expect from the purveyors of the Bible for the God that they pretend exists. But instead of acknowledging the weaknesses of their own position, they try to turn it into a conspiracy theory. Here's the real reason that these heretics disregard our unsupported blind faith. It can't be that we can't prove anything we're claiming. It can't be that we have no evidence to present. It has to be a conspiracy.
God exists, and ultimately everyone knows that he exists. The very fact that some attempt so aggressively to disprove his existence is in fact an argument for his existence.
Nobody aggressively attempts to disprove God. We don't have to. The burden of proof is on the believers, not the unbelievers. You don't see atheists banging on people's doors trying to spread the good news of the non-existence of God. In fact, if the religious would just shut the hell up and leave the rest of us alone, you'd never hear from atheists at all. We'd have no reason to ever open our mouths. Why don't you give that a shot? Keep your stupidity to yourselves.
How do we know that God exists? As Christians, we know that God exists because we speak to Him every day.
No, you talk to yourselves. You cannot show that anyone else is taking part in this conversation. You're engaging in an internal monologue. Stop being ridiculous.
We do not audibly hear Him speaking to us, but we sense His presence, we feel His leading, we know His love, and we desire His grace.
Not in any demonstrable and meaningful way, you don't. These are just more claims made without evidence for emotional reasons. Nobody outside of your silly little cult should take them seriously. It's no different than saying, I know the flying spaghetti monster exists because I sense his presence, I feel his noodly appendages, I know his love of pasta sauce, and I desire his colander. Are you going to believe me? You shouldn't. It's as much bullshit as what you're saying.
Things have occurred in our lives that have no possible explanation other than God.
Have you tried? I bet I could find possible explanations other than God, but you're not willing to consider things that fall outside of your emotionally comforting echo chamber. I have yet to find a single Christian claim of a miracle that has no other possible explanations. In fact, I can't think of a single one where God was even in the top 10 best explanations.
God has so miraculously saved us and changed our lives that we cannot help but acknowledge and praise His existence. None of these arguments can persuade anyone who refuses to acknowledge what is already obvious.
None of them can change the minds of anyone who actually cares about reality and examining it critically, rationally, and logically, and without the emotional trappings that you only get from religion. In fact, the only people those explanations should convince are the emotionally weak, the terminally gullible, and the hopelessly irrational. You know, stupid people.
In the end, God's existence must be accepted by faith. Hebrews 11:6.
In the end, when you realize that you have nothing else that anyone with half a clue would accept, you have to go with faith because you're too clueless to live your own life on your own 2 feet, dealing with reality as it actually is instead of how you desperately wish that it was. That's what religion brings.
Faith in God is not a blind leap into the dark. It is a safe step into a well-lit room where the vast majority of people are already standing.
It's only a blind leap into the dark because those who take it are too terrified to actually open their eyes and deal with the world on its own terms. Those people are pathetic, and just because the vast majority of people are pathetic, that isn't a reason to want to be that way too. The world is changing and religion is failing at an ever-increasing rate. But if it makes you feel good, just keep riding the train into the abyss of ignorance on the wrong side of history while the rest of us work together toward a brighter future on our feet and not on our knees.
Got questions? The Bible has answers, and we'll help you find them.
Too bad they're all nonsense answers, not backed up by objective evidence, not critically evaluated, and conveniently ignored when they make our religious beliefs look archaic or outmoded. But that's what you get when you believe stupid things. You get religion. Isn't it about time you all grew the hell up?